Under the scorching sun, a young woman worked tirelessly in the fields, planting the final seed into the soil. In her past life, she had fought to study agriculture and biology, despite her parents' disapproval, never imagining that one day she would bring an agricultural revolution to another world. But her life wasn't always like this once she was surrounded by glittering aristocracy ballrooms filled with elegance and wealth and the adoring gaze of her fiancé. That world, however, shattered in an instant. With a cruel declaration, her beloved announced the end of their engagement, tearing apart everything she thought was real. Memories of her past life collided with her present, and the unbearable truth dawned on her she was now living inside the very novel she once read. Betrayal, heartbreak, and destiny entwine. Will she be crushed by fate, or rise to rewrite her own story in this unfamiliar world? It was another scorching day spent in the field with sweat on her brow as the young woman planted mercy that he was pretending to be good, but no one would believe him. Leanna looked in shock at the strange man who was mocking her. Despite adjusting to this world, she was surprised by such pomp from the tool. Lena was even more surprised when Louise called her his 10th owner. Louise suddenly proclaimed proudly that 10 volumes wouldn't be enough to tell his story, introducing himself as a sword, forged by the god of abundance, which is why many wanted him. Louise said he was extremely demanding, and it only allowed itself to be wielded by future emperors. Her words didn't impress Elena, who thought he was just a braggart. She added that she hid in a modest form because she fell into the hands of pure idiots. At that moment, the girl began to doubt if she had made the right decision. Meanwhile, Louise kept praising her for being able to see a beautiful flower. Buried in the mud, he finally blessed her as a future ruler, until she declared herself a simple peasant. The sword only responded with severity, not particularly caring who she was. Leanna tried to tell him to find someone better, but he was already decided on her. In the end, the girl resigned and decided she would accept him, determined to consider him just her partner. She took it in her hand and proposed they get along. Shortly after she arrived with the chief, who noticed in amazement. It seemed that he finally realized he was none other than Prince David. The man didn't understand what was happening to him, the rapid growth of all the plants. Leanna considered it a coincidence until she knew that even the bitches were giving birth to 8 puppies, and there were always 2 yolks in the eggs. The Lord found it strange, but Leanna calmly called it a good abundance. Despite all her words, the woman couldn't simply ignore this. Leanna was amazed at how cautious she was. She quietly cut a fruit until the woman noticed her bandaged hand. Leanna couldn't admit that the seal was in her hand, of the sort of abundance. She casually decided to mention that she had found something strange recently. The lady immediately began to panic, thinking she had poisoned herself with metal. Leanna rejected her words and told her she'd gotten a rare tattoo. The next instant, she showed the seal, leaving everyone in complete shock. To her surprise, the Lord reacted coldly and ordered her to bandage her hand again. She also added that her head hurt a lot and that Leanna should leave. This alerted the girl, as the lady was not one to send someone away for a simple discomfort. When she got home, Leanna called Louise affectionately. Instantly, for some reason, the sword was resentful towards her and said he was tired of her charade. Leanna froze when he said he had only accepted the engagement on his father's orders, as if she had done something wrong. It was angry because she came to him after having used another sword. The girl calmed him down, saying she couldn't carry weapons in front of the lady. At first, he didn't trust her, but he melted at her compliments. She gently took him in her arms and promised to take him next time. Her embarrassed reaction made her wonder if a sword could have a soul. She understood that it could not only talk, but also take any form. Despite everything, she still preferred the roasted one afterward. She decided to share how abundant the harvest had been this month. Louise instantly proclaimed proudly that it was all thanks to his blessing. Leanna didn't believe him, thinking he was just flying around the room. Louise protested, annoyed, repeating about the blessing of the great god. Despite all his arguments, Leanna just mocked him. The girl went on high alert instantly. Upon hearing that masculine voice, she quickly approached the window, examining the potential threat. It seemed suspicious to him that there were 3 burly men outside his window. Louise was happy, believing that he would finally show off his skills and bathe the passage in blood. However, Lena ordered him not to move until she called him. In that instant, she understood she was inside the novel she had been reading in her previous life. The girl next to her was Kang. The sword ignited his courage, after which he gripped the hilt tightly. How surprised he was to see a tall blonde behind the door. Even though she called him a thieving cat, she was still fascinated by his beauty. Leanna was shocked by how little her words matched her face. Elegant, her truly beautiful face completely hypnotized him. He decided to break the awkward silence and asked her if she was his little kitten. Not long before the ruler had resumed the story of her divorce. She was the one who initiated the emperor's divorce, who was astonished by her decision. The woman sharply cut in, that she would be the first in this case. Suddenly, she declared that she wouldn't mind being the first wife to kill her husband over the tedious divorce process. Then she thought that after the divorce they would forget about her existence, but that wasn't the case. She became the grandmother of Cayman Marshall, the emperor of the Marshall Empire. She wanted to tell him something, but he asked her to lower her voice. The lady said that their relationship ended the day the divorce was announced at the cathedral, and that he should be more straightforward with her. Despite the demand, Kaman did not change his attitude and thanked her for the fruits. Sina, the protagonist of Another World, and she was instead in the body of Leanna, the typical jealous villainess of the charm and success of the heroine. The lady called him misunderstood after her subtle hint about the stolen object. Kaman remembered that the sword had disappeared from the imperial palace right during the divorce. In addition to this, the unusual abundance of the high-quality harvest also raised doubts. He didn't understand why she kept trying to prove that those two events were unrelated. The woman replied that she was innocent, as she left everything in the imperial palace when she divorced. Barely came and asked about the whereabouts of the sword. She replied that it was in someone else's possession. The empress added that one of her vassals had made a deal with the sword. Obviously, Command couldn't believe it and thought it was a scam. The woman only added that no matter how much he interrogated her, it was the pure truth. She finally concluded that she was just a simple farmer, named Liana. It was right after this conversation that the emperor headed to the girl's house. Liana instantly analyzed the man's behavior and was surprised by his respectful treatment. She couldn't believe that such a handsome man had called her kitten. The girl stepped away and said she was willing to listen to him at the entrance. Since he didn't seem like a criminal, the henchman next to him was immediately outraged by her audacity, but she saw no problem. She was Liana Pond, who fiercely fought for the attention and love of her fiancé. Liana put him in his place, telling him not to expect courtesy after such an invasion. He wanted to retort, but the blonde's raised hand stopped him. Liana didn't understand his true intentions and was distrustful. However, he told her that he was the owner of the sword that she had in her hands. She turned to Luis with a question, but he was scared. He said that only she was his master. Liana looked back at the blonde guy waiting for his response. Luis was instantly offended. For being called a two-timer, it seemed his dialogue attracted a lot of attention from the man. Liana was surprised that he, being her true master, didn't know that the sword could talk. He barely said he knew the sword's will. The girl called him calm and serene. Finally, she declared that he was not the owner and demanded explanations. She stated coldly that she wouldn't open the door again if he lied. Cayman introduced himself as Aurelia's grandson, the old lady. He added that the sword was a valuable object belonging to his family's chief. Cayman said he also disappeared. Right after the grandmother's divorce, he wanted to offer a good compensation, but Liana wasn't interested in that. In that moment, the girl was struck by the calm with which she remembered both lives. It greatly angered her. Luis, unexpectedly sad, begged her not to hand him over as he was ready to live by her side, until his hair turned white. Finally, only after that, Cayman was convinced that Liana really was his owner, Luis. He said that his family never cared about him and demanded that she reveal her true name. This question made Cayman think a lot. Without waiting for a response, Liana said she couldn't hand over the sword to someone who isn't the true owner. Cayman said that this sword is extremely valuable, and he is willing to resort to treacherous methods to obtain it. Liana protested, speaking about Luis's will, but Cayman called it just a weapon. The man suddenly declared seriously that he didn't want to use force against such a fragile girl. Liana declared that her decision wouldn't change even if he were the most powerful in the world. His armor began to crack as he approached. She decided to take the initiative and touched his lips, saying that her little kitty should be quieter. Her behavior was so incredible that Cayman was left petrified. Liana was surprised by his reaction, as it seemed to her to have received the role of villainess who would be exiled. She tried to calm herself, realizing that something here was different from the usual plot, that he was going to propose a marriage of convenience. The girl argued this by saying that he had mentioned dirty tactics. She added that that would be the only legitimate way to take that sword despite her reasoning. Cayman was still amazed by her thoughts. After a brief pause, he suddenly proposed to her. Liana was cautious about his proposal and told him he had to kneel. She was amazed to see that he instantly complied with her demand. Despite his willingness, the girl was forced to refuse, immediately after she slammed the door in his face at full speed. The gesture seemed so rude to them that they couldn't hide their astonishment. They tried to contact Liana, but she stood firm in her decision. Luis shared information about how sour her expressions were and felt happy. Upon hearing the girl say she wouldn't leave the house today, he started seriously considering handing the sword over to that stud. Meanwhile, Cayman Marshall was lost in the idea of how they tricked him for some strange reason. He felt like he was under a spell. Liana's wavy hair and sweet face captivated him without a doubt. They judged her for her treatment of Zaina, even though she didn't even scold her for her lack of manners, despite the fact that Zaina was not David's official fiancé. Still, he found it hard to believe that such a beautiful girl could act like that. After losing, he returned to the palace, where his grandmother was waiting for him. She was surprised when he suddenly declared that he would have to move her. She thought he would take Liana to the Empire, but he fell into her traps. He smiled, saying she demanded marriage, as the only legal way to obtain the sword. The lady knew Liana's boldness, but couldn't believe she proposed that to the Emperor. He clenched his fist, recalling how she shut the door after the proposal. Despite the anger, he knew he couldn't return empty-handed. His passionate gaze made his grandmother understand that the stakes were rising. Before, her grandson was calculating and cold, but now he was intoxicated with emotions. She affectionately hoped all this would turn into love. After 2 days of hiding, Liana had a very strange dream. The girl dreamed of something yellow, soft, and sweet, but she couldn't identify it. As soon as she woke up, she immediately thought of a pumpkin. That fit perfectly. She got out of bed so abruptly that, oops, she ended up falling to the floor suddenly. She managed to secure her position just because of that. It infuriated her how easily her fiancé decided to break off the engagement in front of everyone. All her thoughts were invaded by a sweet pumpkin with noodles. The idea of that delicious food woke her up instantly. Her desire to go harvest was strong. Luis didn't quite understand her words and thought she wanted to chop heads, but that wasn't it. He criticized her clothes without knowing she was going to the garden and not to a bloody battlefield. The girl said the outfit was flawless, but that she'd need his help. She quickly drew a tool on the paper and asked him to take that shape. Luis instantly fulfilled his master's request and transformed into a useful pruner. He was extremely disgusted that he had been tricked so cleverly. Luis reacted with extreme disgust to how the plant sap slid over him. Liana was so absorbed in the harvest that at first she didn't even notice Cayman. He explained that he came here after hearing voices and decided to offer help. It seems he didn't recognize Luis in his new role as he thought he wasn't nearby. He looked closely at the scissors and finally recognized in them the sort of pride. Liana decided to tease Luis and said she liked him serving her like this, diligently, the last seed in the ground, and looked up at the burning sun. In her past life, she worked hard to get into college for agriculture and biology. Today was the day of her 20th birthday, the day he was supposed to propose to her, however he chose to humiliate her in public. Liana, she wanted the sword to help her, but Cayman said he wasn't going to give it up. She immediately asked if he was the typical obsessed guy, which clearly surprised him. The girl decided to take advantage of his presence and asked for help carrying the pumpkins. In the end, he accepted when she proposed inviting him to try a dish. Liana proudly showed him the food, blessed by the god of the mountain. It didn't impress the guy who immediately thought it was food for peasants. Liana smiled and declared that in the future, she wanted to open a business selling food kits finally. Cayman commented that he couldn't stop eating that soup while he enjoyed the food. Liana secretly delighted in her beauty. She was pleased with how much he was enjoying his soup. She decided to show him her new infusion, one she hadn't revealed to anyone. Cayman accepted the drink and was astonished to see ice cubes. In this recap manhwa, the girl declared that she had dug a cave for the ice with a shovel. The boy wanted to offer his help, but she responded that she could do it alone. For some reason, those words sparked respect towards her. Cayman was impressed by her tenacity and persistence, understood that now she could do nothing about her condition. She returned terrified to her father's mansion, who would destroy her for the disgrace, something he hadn't seen in other girls. He smiled sweetly and said that she was truly unique. A few years ago, an angel descended to the lands of the Barker Kingdom. Some considered her a demon, while others thought they should show respect to the guest. Many sought to use her, and in the end she fell in love with the prince, the heir, and got engaged to him, but she had quite a scandalous character. Her name was Kang. Sina, the one who skillfully manipulated Prince David. Her life didn't end in falling in love. That's why she collided with harsh reality. Once that face enchanted David, but now he only felt irritation. Kang Sina demanded explanations, and that he admit he was avoiding her. The girl didn't like that they hadn't talked in a long time. David felt irritated and responded that she didn't want to talk normally either. He remembered how recently she got mad because he danced with Lady Altair and didn't give her a mermaid tear. Kang Sina immediately accused him, reminding him how he wanted to be Lady Altair's concubine. David tried to justify himself by saying all of that was important. Lena looked at the man with detachment, not understanding why she had to go through this in the original story. Lena, from a political connection standpoint. Zaina was outraged by how easily he made new contacts, knowing she had no one else but him. She called him weak for continuing to excuse himself with the importance of politics. Every new word from the girl drove him even crazier. He ordered that she be taken out of the office, but Zaina wouldn't stop protesting. The girl couldn't believe he allowed himself to treat an extraterrestrial princess like that. He once swore eternal love to her, and now he was forming a harem of concubines. She was so shocked by the drastic change in her beloved prince, something that wasn't in the novel. Alone, David mocked her demand for a normal conversation. He abandoned Liana because Kang Zaina had been recognized as a saint by the cathedral. David thought the Duke would beg them to accept Liana as a concubine in the palace, but instead he dishonorably expelled her. Now he was a threat to David, joining another faction, and it hurt him that Eliana would never be like Kang Zaina. He couldn't believe he was really starting to miss her. David tried to pry something out of her, but there was no trace of her. He doubted it a lot. He didn't believe she could survive among commoners, opposed her father, and ended up being thrown out. This was a catastrophe, since everything in this world was terribly expensive. The man suddenly realized that Kang Zaina no longer made sense. He became obsessed with restoring her to her princess status. His vanity reveled in imagining her happiness at his feet. Meanwhile, Carmen thought exactly the same about her new acquaintance. She didn't understand what she could do with those hands that seemed to break upon touch either. She couldn't stop thinking about the ice cave she had dug. Her assistant asked her why she was so lost in thought and silent. Carmen suddenly asked how much ice cost and how it was preserved. He instantly remembered that the ice was supplied by wizards from the magic tower, and it was impossible to buy it. This only puzzled Carmen even more. She needed someone who could advise her based on their experience as if by magic. Liana appeared in her palace with baskets in her hands. The young girl didn't know that Cayman also lived there, which surprised her quite a bit. The young man suddenly thought she was there to find him. However, she surprised him by worrying about his sunburns. On his face, she instantly felt glad to have brought something useful. Liana quickly pulled out an aloe leaf. The commoners had to turn to shamans as they couldn't afford a doctor, understanding what awaited her, and said there was no need to spend on potions when having this barely Cayman thought about the mark on his palm. She caught his attention right away. With a smile, she presented the aloe perfect for treating burns. Liana added that her grandmother cultivated it, which looked a bit like aloe. Cayman was surprised at how common people survived causing a smile from Liana. He wanted to know if she learned that from her parents, but Liana replied that she didn't have any upon seeing the boy's surprise. She hurried to explain herself. The young girl declared that she did have parents, but that she wasn't their biological child. Cayman still felt uncomfortable, which showed he was a good person. She added that she was adopted when very young, and then discarded after an embarrassing broken engagement. She thought that was fine. After all, now she could live freely. Despite her cheerful declaration, Cayman still felt confused. She caressed him. Noticing the delicacy with which she had treated his feelings, Cayman froze instantly. Feeling Leanna's tender touch, it seemed like she didn't even understand what she did. Until she saw his flushed face, she shook. Lena didn't understand how her fate would unfold. The young woman decided to change her father's mind and knelt pleadingly. The basket awkwardly and repeated that she wouldn't give it to Louise. Her scandalous behavior even reached the grandmother, who immediately came to the scene. At first, she only noticed Cayman, but then she was surprised to see Liana, she joked. With a smile about the blushing faces of the lovebirds, the woman greeted him immediately. But Cayman sarcastically called her grandma. Her title made him think that Liana was unaware of her imperial rank. He decided to play along and called her grandson, then asked how they met. Cayman felt uncomfortable with the flowery way in which Liana described their encounter. The grandmother suggested dropping formalities and being friends. They were almost the same age. The boy tried to refuse, but Liana supported him, saying it was destiny. Cayman felt like they were mocking him. He told her to do whatever she wanted. Liana smiled and offered them to try her special watermelon punch. As soon as they saw her creation, they were completely amazed. Liana didn't reveal the secrets of her recipe, which exploded on Luis. Carmen assumed Luis was involved, but she denied it, instantly determined to change the subject. She skewered a piece of watermelon and put the fork in his mouth. She begged with all her strength not to abandon her, promising to be good. Now it seemed very strange to the stern father to hear something like that from his daughter. The emperor wanted to oppose it, but her care confused him. He looked thoughtfully at Liana's smile. He said the watermelon was too sweet alone, and suddenly realized that this watermelon was sweeter than any other. He thought it was a coincidence, but the properties were really different before meeting her Cayman. He only thought about how to strengthen his power, not about ordinary people. He felt embarrassed that he didn't even care how what he ate was made. The boy suddenly remembered how not long ago Lena offered him juice. He was surprised that it was made with leftover grapes. He thought it was tasteless because it was scraps, but Liana explained that it had the same love and effort. Cayman. He froze when she made an analogy with a person whose value can drop due to slander. At first, he just wanted to get the sword back, but now he understood why she was his teacher. All those thoughts awakened in him the desire to talk more with Liana. What was his surprise when the girl appeared right below his balcony, saying goodbye to him. Shining brightly, even from a distance, he wanted to say goodbye too, but something inside him stopped him dead in his tracks. He gave her a deceptively kind smile, and then ordered her to be thrown out of the palace. Liana couldn't even blink. Meanwhile, Liana was happy about the treats her grandmother gave her. She fondly remembered all the praises the woman had given to her dishes. Liana was peacefully thinking about her next recipe until Luis spoke to her. He was devastated because she had tricked him by promising to return. She told him everything about the day, but Luis became furious upon learning that that idiot was also there. He saw him as a direct threat and openly despised him. The sword told Liana about the cruelty of the Marshall family, saying they only treated her well for her usefulness. It seems Elena forgot that last name, although it sounded strangely familiar. Luis insisted she not remain without her loyal protector and remember his wickedness. She decided to ask him if he had really decided to stay with her forever. She understood there was no battlefield in her life, but Luis still decided to be faithful to her. Liana felt he was hiding something. Considering his escape from the imperial house, she was surprised to see Luis suddenly hiding. She couldn't believe what she saw. Her nanny was in front of her after years of separation. She still felt joy seeing the one who raised her and gave her a home. When she was outside the palace gates feeling the bitterness of defeat, she smiled ironically for having lost in just a couple of hours. Without hesitation, she took her to her house and offered her something to drink. The woman was amazed that Liana moved from that ruin to another house. Liana felt conflicted emotions, because in all these years she was never visited. The hospital staff asked her what kind of tea she wanted. Pointing to various herbs, the young woman remembered her nanny's love for tea and prepared her a chamomile one. Throughout that time, the woman attentively observed every action of the abandoned ex-aristocrat. A few minutes later, Liana offered her an aromatic and exquisite tea and decided to ask if the Lord had helped her. Ignoring the truth, the nanny believed that the Lord would take pity on the abandoned lady, all thanks to her. Confirming her suspicion, she took a sip relieved. Her words enraged Liana, who survived solely on her own means. The nanny told her not to lie, as she wasn't even capable of making a living. Liana noticed that they were now looking at her openly with disdain. With no reason to be kind, the nanny was outraged when the girl mentioned the price of the chamomile tea. She couldn't charge a guest, Liana. She maliciously responded that she had been the first to behave inappropriately. That's how the aristocrat Liana was left to her fate by everyone. She furiously slammed the doors. The young woman reprimanded her for not recognizing her efforts. After this, she turned and told her to leave if she had nothing more to say. The nanny immediately changed her tone and begged for a minute, but Liana stood firm. However, she froze upon hearing the Duke's order to return home. The nanny broke down crying, telling her how hard it was for him to leave, describing in detail how much he had suffered. Her words only fueled Liana's anger, as it was obvious she didn't believe those stories. The nanny froze. When she asked if he had found a new purpose for her, Liana realized there was no affection at all and ordered her to leave immediately. The woman threatened to tell the Duke, but Liana just cursed him right as the nanny was at the door. Liana added a couple of wicked words. The door slammed shut behind her, after which her body felt unpleasant sensations. A new day dawned, and for Cayman it started with a conversation with her sister. All this time she had done nothing but daydream. Not knowing when she would return to reality, Princess Rise told her it wasn't appropriate for her to stay so long in foreign lands. After the divorce, her grandmother returned to her homeland, where she was given territories on the border with the Empire. Her parents condemned her choice, and did not accept her sincere interest, however. In her current life, demanding an explanation of how to live without a dime, the young girl was filled with resentment, unsure whether to keep screaming for mercy. The former emperor missed her and created a teleportation zone. Cayman wanted to tell her that he felt ashamed, but she immediately gave him the reasons for her detention. She assumed he was either still obsessed with the sword or had fallen head over heels for the first time. Cayman said it was absurd, but the blush on his face betrayed him. He couldn't believe Elena wouldn't stop occupying his mind. Not even during meetings, a knight entered the office and reported that something strange was happening in Poston, and that someone was watching Elena. Moreover, a few days ago, a servant related to the Watchers had visited her. She added that according to Lady Aurelian, they could be related to Leanna's ex-fiancé. Instantly, Cayman recalled her words about an embarrassing breakup. The Emperor couldn't believe they dared to return. Now that Liana had blossomed and found her way, she quickly headed for the exit, fully determined to rescue the girl. However, he understood that this might seem strange coming from a friend. All these emotions made him wonder why he had gotten so angry. He found a justification. If she gets kidnapped, the sword will disappear with her Cayman. She stood there until a maid appeared behind her. It was the young girl's nanny. He vividly imagined how they were taking Liana from her house by force. Even harder was imagining his ex begging her to come back, exploiting his loneliness. This second thought was more terrifying than the first, so he ran towards her in an instant, ordering to check the perimeter while he inspected the girl. The sudden silence suggested she might have left with the villain. He barely heard a female scream and immediately broke into the house. The first thing he saw was her holding something and asking for help. He froze, seeing the girl holding a destroyed beam from the ceiling. It turned out that the boards in one corner of the ceiling had deteriorated and rotted. Leanna added that she'd already removed the damaged parts and had spare boards. She wondered if it was worth asking Cayman for help. The man wanted to suggest hiring a carpenter, but she was ready to do it alone. The girl smiled, saying it was unlikely to find a carpenter in that village. Besides, it wouldn't be safe for her to invite him while alone involuntarily. She remembered the babysitter's mockery about how she alone repaired the thatched roof. Leanne felt that the babysitter envied her well-being and previously took pleasure in her difficult situation. Carmen suddenly noticed the hammer in her hand. With pain in her eyes, she pointed to a carriage. Liana didn't understand what the carriage was for, as she was unaware of her father's plans. Suddenly, she assumed. She smiled while Louise protested because they were using it again. The girl reassured him again, telling him she was only using it in extreme cases. Louise pushed her aside and told her that the hammer still didn't seem like the best option to him. The girl didn't realize how she ended up practically on the ground after the impact. She didn't understand what kind of heat was coming from where she had fallen. It turned out she had crashed directly into Cayman, who protected her from falling to the ground. He jumped instantly, asking how she was doing. Liana felt so embarrassed after so much loneliness that she couldn't say a word. She immediately stepped back, assuring that she was perfectly fine despite Cayman taking the worst of it. He only worried about her condition, gently stroking her neck, asking her to be careful while checking that she didn't have any bumps. Cayman sighed in relief. The male attention felt so strange to Liana, who kept looking at him shyly. Cayman already seemed attractive to her, but now she couldn't take her eyes off him. She scolded herself for relaxing and forgetting how handsome he was. Liana found it strange that her father was worried about her future living situation. However, her hopes were shattered by the nanny's negative response. To think that suddenly she could see him as a man, not just a friend. She realized that indeed he was the perfect husband. Cayman reacted and noticed that she was acting weird and had blushed. He started checking her hand without knowing. He should check her heart. The man. He noticed with unease that her hand was swollen and painful. Liana awkwardly looked away and said it wasn't anything serious. As soon as he said it was all thanks to him, he remembered the warmth of her body and tried to push those thoughts away, but he couldn't get them out of his head. Finally, Cayman said he was excellent at bandaging wounds, and after a while, he gently wrapped the girl's hand. Liana didn't understand why her heart was racing over something like this. The guy asked if something had happened. As if forgetting that she was on top of him, he saw her smile and felt a great relief, confirming that she was okay. He decided to leaving Liana thinking about his sudden concern. The girl stopped him and offered to have lunch together, but he firmly refused, stopping at the door and telling her not to hesitate to ask for help. Liana was so stunned that she had no choice but to accept. Alone, Luis apologized once more for what had happened. He was surprised when she kissed him. The woman was crying, saying she had been ordered to take her as far away as possible. After this, thanking him for everything from the bottom of her heart, she suddenly realized that without him, she would have never been in the arms of that noble, handsome guy. She declared that the pathetic David didn't even come close to him and looked like a dried squid on top of that. Still, she was worried that Cayman only needed Luis. Her enthusiasm cooled as she thought that it was all because of the sword. Despite that, she was still willing to accept his seduction tactic. After all, he was too beautiful to resist his charms. Aware of her difficult situation, the young woman sighed heavily. Now she understood why emperors gave in to beauty. Still, Liana felt bad because he had gone away hungry. When she mentioned potatoes, Louise feared she would use it as a roast. Leanna calmed him down and cooked potatoes. Then he said Cayman was an emperor. He didn't take it seriously, and said he was good enough to do it. The girl instantly became alert upon hearing footsteps behind the door. She didn't understand. Who could come so late and assumed it was Cayman, thinking he was back for food? Liana innocently opened the door, not knowing who was there. Meanwhile, Cayman was completely absorbed in his work. Something in Liana's heart froze when the woman suggested taking her to her hometown, as she would be safe there. He was carefully writing each document, trying to concentrate as much as possible. However, his head was still a mess after what had happened. Apparently, his grandmother noticed his confusion and asked how he was. She said she brought him something to eat and placed a plate down. Cayman looked surprised at the plate and asked what it was. He was shocked to say it was a full meal, but she suggested he try it. The emperor was blown away by the delicious taste of that delicacy while enjoying his light snack. Aurelian decided to inquire about the help Leanna provided today. He intended to ask her if it was true that commoners always did all the work. Despite having money, Aurelian considered it admirable that Leanna did everything by herself. Suddenly, he became worried again about Leanna's injured wrist. The grandmother replied that he shouldn't worry since she had prepared the sandwich and brought it. In gratitude for the help, he also noticed that the girl looked a bit pale after realizing that Eliana rarely rested. Aurelian left the office. Cayman looked at the sandwich with a sweet smile and decided to visit the girl tomorrow. Suddenly, he felt embarrassed, realizing he was just looking for an excuse to see her. His hopes vanished when he saw a mercenary. The former aristocrat agreed since she had no other choice. She didn't understand what to do now. Near the window, he turned abruptly, trying to identify the potential threat. What was his surprise when he found Luis in front of him? He asked if he had decided to be his, but he immediately refused. Cayman felt that the sword wanted to convey something urgent, but he couldn't. He finally reached the conclusion that something must have happened to Liana. Meanwhile, the young girl lay in bed suffering from a high fever, having previously enjoyed good health. But a single encounter affected her so much. She knew this was going to happen, but the stress was inevitable. That same night in this recap manhwa, she opened the door waiting for Cayman. But she was mistaken. At the door stood her father, haughty and cruel. Since she had truly been abandoned to her fate, the young girl was in a state where she no longer had the strength to cry or suffer. The mistress tried to calm her down by saying that her father knew about her innocence. Liana knew that was a lie. Because in the novel, he didn't show up until the last chapter. She immediately imagined how she would die in an alley with not a penny to her name. She remembered those moments fondly. After all, her mother didn't know that her daughter would cause a revolution. That possible ending scared her so much that she protested instantly with all her strength. She thought she could change something, but everything was already written. It was inevitable. She thought maybe David wouldn't have abandoned her. But he was a detestable guy. No matter how many times they met, he always acted with arrogance and conceit, apparently. That was the reason she fell for Kang Sena, the only one who dared to challenge him. Liana immediately imagined how unbearable it must be to live with such a jerk in real life. Before, her character was obsessed with being with him. But now her happiness hung by a thread, realizing it would be very difficult to be happy with that man. She decided to change her attitude. Liana took a deep breath and decided that she had simply freed herself. While thinking that now her real life would begin, they finally arrived at their destination, wiping away their tears. The nanny hugged the young girl tightly and apologized. Liana appreciated the huge risk she was taking for her, knowing her father's character. She finally added that she would definitely pay for such kindness. The woman gently stepped away from the girl and told her not to worry. In agriculture in another world, not long before her life was filled with luxurious balls and aristocracy, she confidently said that the Duke would come back for her when she was useful again. Liana understood she was right, but still it hurt to hear those cynical words. Suddenly the thought popped into her head of whether they had left her there for their own future benefit. She brushed that thought away just as her kind nanny was saying goodbye to her. Not knowing what awaited her, Liana said goodbye to her most beloved person. The girl decided to think positively. Since she now had a home, however, her positive thoughts turned sad when she saw the state of the house. Liana, who once lived in luxury, looked in horror at the devastation surrounding her. Suddenly, she realized that now she was truly a beggar. She couldn't believe she had lived with a silver spoon, and now this. The last straw was that the roof, already weak, was leaking. She felt helpless because she understood that now everything depended on her Liana. She stood up abruptly and declared that this was real life. She wasn't going to starve or wait for someone to save her thanks to her attitude. In just a few months, she managed to adapt to the situation. The villagers couldn't believe that the Duke's own daughter lived there. They thought Liana, she was always surrounded by people in elegant dresses and suits, unfamiliar with hard work at the center of all that lavish party, was dead until they saw a chicken in her yard. That small detail made them think right away that she was still alive. Liana hid, holding her breath upon hearing that the chicken was just like the one they lost. She remained hidden until the little girl discovered her behind the house. What a tense moment. The little girl sadly remarked that that lady looked very pitiful. The mother wanted her daughter to apologize until she saw Liana. Surprise overwhelmed them. They were stunned by the smile with which that dirty girl offered them sweet potatoes. Luckily for her, the climate was very similar to her previous life, and so in no time Liana got to work on planting. That soil and climate were perfect for growing grains a blessing. The young woman knew the local plants, which allowed her not to starve. The locals were amazed by such delicious delicacies. They couldn't even imagine that something so tasty could grow in their land. In conversation, Liana discovered that apples cost 1 coin for 3. As soon as she learned the true price, her face darkened instantly. Suddenly, an idea popped into her mind. Her beloved stared at her intently. That day was a shock for her as he declared his desire to break off the engagement, about how to monetize her finding. Time passed relentlessly, and the young woman had been in Postine for 6 years. During that time, she managed to forge her name and put her house in order. Despite the success, 2 years ago, she faced the fact that people no longer needed her product. She understood that she urgently needed a new harvest to sell. The young woman firmly decided that her next big business would be beautiful apples. Many people here were unaware of the basics of agriculture and how to grow perfect fruits. It was precisely for that reason that she managed to create something that amazed everyone. She was surprised when they told her that this luxury deserved to be presented to the lord of these lands. She was outraged by the speed at which her neighbors fled with her precious apple. Only then did she notice that they were taking it to an imposing woman. Liana saw for the first time the elderly lady who governed these lands. She couldn't believe it was possible to grow such a large apple without magic. Liana proudly introduced herself as the cleverest farmer, and she was shocked when the woman recognized her as the duke's daughter. Suddenly, she claimed that she even had reports on her life and work on the farm. Liana smiled upon hearing her. She couldn't believe anything that was happening just a moment ago. She was making coffee in her kitchen, until there was an explosion. She confessed that she doubted the girl's skills. Liana continued to observe the woman's astonishment, and then dropped that the apple was worth a gold coin. Liana argued that they were extremely rare, and that it had taken her a lot of effort to grow them, barely mentioning that she had cultivated 20 apples like that. The ruler was left speechless, and suddenly added that for those fruits much more could be obtained than what she had offered. The woman confessed that she doubted Liana could adapt after her life in the palace. However, the girl was fully committed to farming different varieties of delicious fruits. She praised her peaches so much that the old woman swallowed hard without being able to help it. Suddenly, she proposed that Liana become the court gardener. To her disappointment, Liana just shrugged. She said she didn't want to work for anyone. In this recap manhwa, the woman tried to reason with her, telling her that her whole family had turned their backs on her, but the girl didn't care. She was completely confident in herself, and even proposed to invest in her business. Liana also mentioned that some protection wouldn't hurt, considering that she was alone. Finally, the woman agreed and demanded that she be provided with everything necessary. This way, the girl sold all her apples and later the peaches at a higher price. Liana bought land. As she recalled the last moments of her past life, an unbearable headache hit her. Her fiancé said she hired workers and started raising livestock, increasing her sales. One of those work days, she heard about Lord David's wedding, who had rejected her. Nevertheless, the girl wasn't interested in his fate, not even in the fact that she could be a queen. She said with a smile that she loved farming too much to think about something like that. This year, her harvest was a record, so she started selling in another village, calmly thinking about what to plant next. Enjoying her success at the same time, Liana was so distracted that she tripped and fell headfirst to the ground. She rubbed her neck painfully until she saw the cause of her fall. The girl couldn't believe she had found a real magic hoe. She was thrilled to have found such a gem among the common gardening tools, barely able to enjoy her find. When it lit up with a bright blue light, the magical object asked if she was now its owner. Liana accepted immediately. Just after those words, the magic tool flew out of her hands. She couldn't believe what she saw when a seal appeared in her hand. Before her emerged a beautiful sword named Louis Garbon Bontoir III.